Hello everyone, I hope you're having a great day so far. And today I have an absolute treat for you guys. It's a game between Adolf Anderssen and Jean Drofsen, and it's a game famously known as the Evergreen chess game, played in Berlin in 1852. Actually, following the Anderssen's death in 1879, William Steinitz, the very first world champion, published a tribute in the Field magazine. He published Anderssen's two most famous games, the Immortal game, which I already covered, and the Evergreen game. This is the Evergreen game. Annotating the famous move 19th rook a to d1, which we are going to look at, Steinitz wrote, and I quote, an evergreen in the Laurian crown of the departed chess hero, well, Adolf Anderssen here, and the quote ends here. And well, from that day on, this game became the Evergreen game. Well, but Steinitz couldn't have predicted how good of a name he has just created for this game. The game probably became the most analyzed game in the history of chess, with Howard Staunton starting its analysis in 1853, so 1 year after this game. And the latest analysis I can remember is done by Gary Kasparov in his book to the founders in 2003. So about 150 years of crazy analysis this game has seen, and still a lot of masters still analyze this game and find new beauty. Today I'm going to cover this game and try to uncover most of the beautiful variations I can find. So let's see why this game is considered the most famous game of all time. Okay, pawn to e4 by Adolf Anderssen, and Jean Drofsen played pawn to e5. In his immortal game last year, I mean in 1851, f4 was played, the King's Gambit by Adolf Anderssen. But in this time, he played knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to c4, so the Italian game, bishop to c5, and pawn to b4. So he is going for the Ivan's Gambit, equally powerful and equally aggressive type of gambit. Bishop takes b4 and pawn to c3. This is the main idea of white, like kicking the bishop back to a5. So later on, this bishop can assume to this diagonal. Okay, d4. The last game I covered was Gunsberg and Steinitz World Championship game, where Gunsberg played castle in this position and won a very nice game against Steinitz. But d4 should also is a very main line right now, because it gives black the option to take and then white castles, and suddenly queen b3 is a threat, cd5 is a threat, bishop a3 is a threat, and black is in a dilemma. What you want to do? Definitely you don't want to capture on c3 and allow queen b3, with f7 being very weak and bishop is coming to a3 and you're never castling anymore. So that's one thing you don't want to do as black. You don't want to compromise your development for all these pawns. So after castles, Jean Drofsen played a very interesting move, pawn to d3. His idea is, if you take with the bishop, then, well, your bishop is no longer attacking that pawn on f7, and now I can, just develop and castle. And your bishop is not in an ideal place right now. And if you take with the queen, well, knight can jump to e5 after knight to e7 to g6 to e5 to hit the queen and bishop. So that will be a tempo you have to look out for later on in the game. So, well, we are not in a hurry to take the pawn. So after d3, Adolf Anderssen played queen to b3, attacking the pawn on f7. Queen to f6, pawn to e5. Of course, the pawn cannot be captured, because you can never open this e file for this rook when your king is just right in the center of the board. Okay, queen to g6, defending the pawn now and also getting out of the pawn's square. Okay, so in this position, what I can find is bishop a3 and rook d1 are played more frequently, even after this game and before this game. The move played by Anderssen, rook to e1, is actually the novelty in 1852. And this novelty, even though this game was such a beautiful game and such a famous game, this move was never repeated until 1919. So about 60 years after this game. And this move was repeated by none other than Rudolf Spellman, who actually won a very nice game with Rook to E1 as well. Rook to E1 actually have a 100% score so far, and only like 8 games was played in database. So if you want to surprise your opponents, Rook to E1 is a very strong move. Okay, so knight to E7. Of course, you have to develop the knight and to castle the king to the safety. White is still not in hurry to take the pawn. Played bishop to A3. Now putting the bishop on this diagonal, because you know your black is going to castle and the rook and knight would be on the same diagonal as this bishop. So that's it. That's just putting the bishop there. And in this position, castles makes the most sense. Probably game would have continued with knight bd2, bishop d6, threatening knight to a5, and queen to b1. Very interesting move. Attacking the pawn on d3. Next move, you're going to take that pawn on d3, and then you have some pressure. The queen is attacked, the pawn on h7 will be attacked, and you still have the problem to solve with this bishop on c8 right now, right? You cannot really play d6 because this square is quite well guarded by white. And where else you would put this bishop? You cannot really push the pawn from b7 either. So all in all, I would say as a human player, as a human, this position feels like really good position for white. I mean, the compensation is overflowing. But according to engines, it is just draw. And well, that's what engines says. But okay. Bishop to e3 and pawn to b5 by Gene Drofson. So, well, opening the b7 square for this bishop, of course. And doing this by sacrificing a pawn, but also gaining some valuable time. Queen takes b5. This is what played by Anderssen according to my database. But interestingly, in 40 years, something like 40 years after this game, in 1890s, not William Steinis, but Emil Lasker, the second world champion, would write about this game in one of his books, and he said that in this position, instead of queen into b5, bishop into b5 was played in actual game. He might have more insight on this game because it's a casual game, not played in a tournament. It's a casual game, so we have no way to prove this. But yeah, according to him, bishop takes b5 was played, and after rook b8, queen a4, the game would have transposed to the original position. But okay. Queen into b5, according to my database. Rook to b8, attacking the queen. Queen to a4. Now you don't want this bishop to be always be hanging, and so bishop to b6. Assuming this diagonal, so very nice one. Knight b to d2, simply developing. And in this position, you definitely would like to castles. And after rook a to d1, white would probably going to win the pawn on d3 by putting the knight on e4 or f1 and then bishop d3. And right now, white is not down a pawn after take the pawn on d3. So I would say white is just better because of this development the white has on the king side. But okay, after knight bd2, black played bishop to b7. The idea is they want to develop the bishop, and well, the queen and the bishop are looking at the pawn on g2, but there are too many pieces in between. But yeah, you don't know, you never know when this diagonal opens up and suddenly your queen is very well placed to attack the king. Okay, knight to e4 by Anderssen. Well, just developing the knight and putting the knight in between this bishop and, you know, on this pressure, and this also just stops the queen from defending the pawn on d3. This position you probably should have castled, and then, well, bishop takes d3 happens and some knight f6 check is in the air, so you should play queen h5 and the game continues, I guess. But what happened here is, well, instead of castles, black played a very dubious move, queen to f5. I have a very hard time just knowing what's the purpose of this move, because white's next move is bishop d3, which was an obvious move, and now you were stepped directly into knight f6 check, losing the queen. So now you have to lose another move to play queen to h5 and to just secure your queen. But if you had to play queen to h5, why didn't you play queen to h5 right now? And then after bishop takes d3, just castle your king to the safety. But okay, I guess the well, Mr. Jean just overlooked bishop to d3 and had to play queen h5 next. That's the only mistake he had played in this game. Okay, now that you have gained so many tempos, you don't want to allow black king to castle anymore, of course. So white to move. Uh, your all pieces are developed. Now it's time to strike. What will you play in this position if you have white pieces? So try to pause the video and try to find the best move for white. Alright. So the move in question is very natural. Knight to f6 check. Your king has been in the center for far too long, and it's time to open the center. And after g takes, e takes. Now the rook has opened up to the king, and the knight is pinned, so you're winning your knight back anyways. So it's not really a sacrifice. It's just opening the files. Okay. Maybe Gene Robson has seen this knight f6 idea. I'd stepped directly into it because he had this move in mind, rook to g8, and suddenly I think queen into f3, rook into g2, and this bishop lined up. It does looks very enticing for black because, well, you have like 4 pieces into the attack right now to white king, and your king is kind of fine in the center. As if white takes the knight with the pawn, then you're already winning as black. But this is the magical position, the move number 19th, which I just quoted. There is another remark I want to quote by Lasker this time. This move, this magical move, which is now considered dubious, but at that time was considered double exclamation mark move. Rook a to d1, seemingly giving up this knight because this pawn is pinned, and giving up this ideas of rook into g2 also is like brilliant. But that was the idea, and Lasker quoted here, one of the most subtle and profound moves on record. And this is the original notes of Lasker. So, well, he acknowledged this move as one of the most subtle moves ever played. Anyways, rook a to d1, and the idea is very deep, very devious. You will see what I mean by that. Though a better move would have been bishop e4. But we don't go into this line. But okay, rook a to d1. Now here black has one defense, and I will go back to this position after the game and I will show you what the defense is. But in this position, well, Gene Robson just played queen into f3. That's a free knight, right? Because why not? The pawn cannot capture. The pawn is pinned. So you just won a knight. And Robson is like, what you want to do now? Well, this is what Anderssen has calculated in the position. Rook takes e7 check. And in this position, knight takes e7 was played. I will get back to this position again as well to show you a few variations. But okay, this is the magical moment why the rook a to d1 was played. Sorry, this one. So white to move. Try to find the best move in this position which Anderssen played while I give you a couple of seconds. Alright, so the move is the immortal game move, queen into d7, sacrificing the queen, and just for a pawn, it's just luring the king to the d file, then it will step right into the front of the rook. And you cannot really ignore, because if you play this, then queen e7 is direct mate. So king into d7 was played. Now, yes, your rook is hanging, so you cannot really play anything with this bishop to give a check. You have to give a double check. And there is 2 ways to give a double check. I have seen many people falling for bishop b5 check. Yes, bishop, if the king goes here, then it's the same type of checkmate. But after bishop b5 check, king goes to e6 and bishop check, king takes f6, and black is just completely winning. You are getting checkmated as white. So after king takes d7, you have to choose the right double check, which is bishop to f5 check, stopping the king from going back to c8. And it's a double check, so you cannot really take the bishop or the rook because both pieces are giving a check in one move. In the game, king to e8 was played according to my database. Again, Lasker said that instead of king d8, king to c6 was played in the original game, and bishop d7 was a checkmate which was played. But again, we have no way to well check this fact. But okay, according to my database, this move was played. Bishop to d7 check, and no matter where your king goes, next move is bishop takes e7 mate. For example, king af8, which was played in the game. Bishop takes e7 is a beautiful two bishop checkmate, and this pawn is actually covering the g7 square, so it has a role to play in this checkmate. And well, yeah, that's the game. But as I said, I'm going to jump back to this beautiful defense after this queen into f3. The only defense white has after rook a to d1 is, well, the magical move in this position which engines find. And the move is, well, bishop to d4. The idea is simple. You just want to cut off the d file because you know queen into d7 is coming. The d file check will be there. So bishop to d4, just closing the file after c takes d4, queen into f3. And let's say you play bishop to e4 to defend the g2 pawn that way, because after rook takes g2, king h1, and suddenly if you move the queen, you lose the rook, right? But no, there is beautiful resource with rook h2 check, king h2, queen f2 check, king h1, queen h4 check, king here, check, and you suddenly realize that this cannot be played. So you have to go back, and queen g3 check leads to perpetual, means a draw. So even after finding like 10 move sequence, you are going to get a draw with an absolute best play. So that's the idea of bishop d4. Otherwise, you're just lost in this position after this beautiful rook a to d1 move. And after queen into f3, rook e7 check. In the game, knight e7 was played, as we have seen, and how the game ended. But there was an argument about king to d8, which was found by many grandmasters back in days. And they did found this beautiful move, rook takes d7, double exclamation, of course, king to c8. And for like almost like decades after this game, a lot of people didn't find any defense in this position, like how you continue from black side, white side, and black side. It feels like white's position is running out of moves, like you have to play bishop to f1. And after bishop to f1, I guess they do consider that this position is still like good for white, maybe, but there is an absolute brilliant tactical shot in this position. So if you want, you can try to pause the video and try to find this tactical shot. All right, the move in question is the brilliant attraction rook to d8 check, and you left this rook on d8 to get captured by anything, all three pieces. And while this rook is absolutely not defended by anything right now. Now, if the knight takes, well, then the brilliancy is, if the rook takes, then you lost control over the g file, and now your queen is just hanging because there is no longer a pin on the pawn. And after rook to d8 check, if the king takes, then, well, bishop f5 check stops the king from going back. The only squares are, the e8 square, but then bishop to d7 is just crushing. Bishop takes c6 check. You lost the queen, and you are getting checkmated soon also. But after bishop f5 check, let's say you play queen d1, and there is a resource with knight d4. Here you have to find one last trick that black has to take on g2 pawn, and not take the knight. You have to find bishop to h3. Nice move. And next you are going to take the knight because it's pinned. And the last and the most beautiful variation after rook to d8 is what will happen after knight takes d8. And well, you already know the move, the Anderssen move, queen to d7 check. Again, sacrificing a queen on d7 just to get the king on d7. So it's attraction sacrifice again, and exact same type of checkmate. And after bishop here, this is checkmate. So yeah, that's the game. I hope you really like this game. This is one of my favorite games, so I really like this game as well. And I hope you like this video, and well, I will see you on the next one. Bye.